She lit the last candle with a practiced flick of the match, exhaling like the effort had cost her something. "There," she said brightly, surveying the table, not to admire, but to perform. The wine was already uncorked, 4 glasses filled, 2 couples besides us, friends we'd known for years, the kind you trust enough to let see your kitchen before it's clean. I made a quiet joke, something harmless, a little dry, something about the wine label looking like it belonged in a therapy office. A couple of polite chuckles rose. Then she tilted her head, lifted her glass, and gave them all the punchline she'd apparently been saving. "He thinks he's funny. It's cute, really." The line landed cleaner than mine. They laughed. All of them, except one. Talia, one of her oldest friends, caught my eye across the table and smiled. But it wasn't amusement. It was soft, almost apologetic, like she'd just witnessed something she wasn't meant to. I smiled too, tight and shallow. The kind you give when you're pretending the moment didn't stick, when you don't want to seem brittle about it. But something did tear. Not in the dramatic sense. Not all at once. It was quieter than that, like fabric pulling apart at the seam, thread by thread, slow enough that even I wasn't sure at first if it was real. She was already moving on, filling plates, topping off glasses. Her tone brightened, chirping about some podcast she loved lately. She didn't look at me again. Not directly. I nodded where appropriate, chewed when I was meant to. But my mind replayed the laugh that came too fast, too easily, and the glance she gave Talia when she said it, like they shared a script I hadn't seen. Later, when the guests had gone and the candles were snuffed out, I stayed behind in the dining room, collecting empty glasses. She passed through once, humming, her heels clicking across the floor. "Fun night," she said without looking. I watched her back as she disappeared down the hallway. It wasn't about the joke. Not really. It was about the casual way she offered me up, the effortless sacrifice for a laugh. She used to defend me when I missed the landing. Now she was handing out the push. And the laugh that stuck in my head the most? It wasn't hers. It was Talia's, the one that didn't come. She was brushing her teeth when I brought it up, deliberately unthreatening timing. No confrontation. Just a quiet question reflected in the mirror between us. "That line tonight," I said, folding a hand towel with more attention than it needed. "Was that supposed to be funny?" She didn't pause brushing. Just raised her eyebrows in the mirror like she was waiting for the punchline. "It's called banter," she said around a mouthful of foam, then spat. "You know, lighten up a little." I nodded once, slow. No reaction. No defense. No escalation. The point wasn't to win the moment. It was to watch her manage it. Her tone was casual, but her shoulders stiffened slightly. Barely perceptible, but real. I catalogued it. Like I'd started to with other small things lately. The way she got louder when she was nervous. The way she used jokes as shields when things grazed too close to truth. She stepped past me toward the bedroom, already finished with the conversation. Or so she assumed. I followed a few seconds later, not to pursue, just to witness. She was bent at the dresser, pulling on an oversized tee she didn't used to wear to bed. Not when things were better. Her movements were brisk, practiced, unbothered. She didn't ask if I was okay. That wasn't new, but I still noted it. "Good night," she said, flipping off the lamp on her side. I stayed in the dark, lying beside her with my eyes open. Not angry. Just awake. It wasn't about the joke. It wasn't even about how the room laughed. It was the way her eyes hadn't been on me when she said it. They'd gone elsewhere, just for a flash, and I hadn't missed it. Not a look of apology, or teasing affection. Not even challenge. It was satisfaction. Like her line had landed exactly where she wanted it to. And that someone had seen. I thought back through the dinner, through who had laughed, who had looked away, who had stayed silent. That friend of hers, the one she'd invited late. The one who showed up with a casual bottle of wine and a new story about switching gyms. He hadn't said much during the meal, but I remembered her leaning slightly when he spoke. I remembered her refill of his glass before her own. None of it meant anything on its own. But I'd learned by now, patterns always start small. You just have to watch long enough for them to repeat. The first time I noticed the makeup, it was a Tuesday. She wasn't meeting anyone, at least that's what she said. Just a self-care night, which had become her new routine. Once a week, she'd disappear for a few hours. No explanation required. Mental recharge, she called it. But I noticed the eyeliner. The way it winged slightly past the corner, sharper than usual. The way she checked her reflection twice before grabbing her keys. I didn't ask where she was going. That kind of question would have given her something to resist, and I wasn't interested in resistance. I was interested in clarity. Later, I heard the garage door before I heard her steps. She came in humming, a practiced kind of lightness. Her tone didn't match the clock. I asked, "Good night?" She kicked off her shoes without looking at me. Just what I needed. I didn't push. I just watched the heels she'd left by the door. She didn't usually wear those for herself. From there, I began collecting small signals, quiet things, repeatable things. The friend, the same one from the dinner, started appearing more often. Not invited directly, she'd say. He was just around. It's not that deep. But he always arrived right when she opened a bottle of wine. Never too early, never too late. She played it like coincidence. I started treating it like a test. At a small birthday for a mutual friend, I watched from across the room. She was mid-conversation, smiling at someone else. Then he appeared behind her. She didn't flinch, didn't turn, just shifted her weight slightly, like she already knew he was there. That's what caught me. That unconscious awareness. The way she adjusted without needing to confirm it was him. I began listening more closely during conversations, especially when his name came up. She never used it first, but when others did, her face changed. Not visibly, but her voice softened by half a note. Almost imperceptible. But not to me. That was the shift. Not rage. Not suspicion. Just focus. She thought she was staging an illusion, and to most people, she was. But I wasn't trying to catch her. I wasn't hunting. I was tracking. Quietly. Precisely. Because what most people miss is this: exposure never comes from chaos. It comes from rhythm. And she was beginning to repeat herself. It was a small gathering. Low stakes. Someone's new promotion. Just enough of a reason to open wine and pretend to celebrate something. 8 of us total, spread between the kitchen and living room, the music soft enough to pretend it didn't matter. I moved through the hallway without sound, partly out of habit, partly because I wanted to see what wasn't meant for me. When I stepped into the kitchen, they were alone. Her back was to me. He was leaning against the counter, facing her, too close to be casual, but not enough to be called out. They both turned at the sound of my footsteps too quickly. Not startled, just caught in the middle of a moment they hadn't planned to explain. She straightened first, voice light, almost too light. "He was just telling me about his trip," she said, a hand gesturing vaguely in the air like she was brushing away any potential question. The man nodded, the kind of nod you give when you're grateful for someone taking the lead. I met his eyes for a beat too long. "Where to?" He hesitated. "Just up north, quick thing." It was sloppy. He hadn't traveled. Not recently. I'd seen his social media, heard his name mentioned at work. No trips. No gaps. Just the usual rhythm, and no northern detours. She didn't correct him. She just reached for a bottle, refilled a glass that didn't need it, and asked if I wanted anything. I told her no, politely, then left the room as if nothing had registered. But inside, the lock turned. It wasn't about lies, not directly. It was about calibration. The way she smoothed over the narrative with practiced ease. The way he followed her lead without needing context. They were aligned, not in content, but in instinct. That was confirmation. Not because of what they said, but because of how they fell silent before they said it. People only do that when they've rehearsed what not to say. Later that night, as we pulled into the driveway, she mentioned how nice the night had been. "It's good to have easy people around," she said, unclipping her seatbelt. I agreed. "It is." She took it as agreement, but I meant something else. There's a kind of quiet that only comes when two people are trying not to look suspicious. And I had just walked into it. The message came 3 days later, casual, like it wasn't about to shift everything. "Not sure if you noticed, but they'd been weird for months." It was from Rowan, one of the guests at that first dinner. The kind of friend who stayed out of drama by pretending not to notice it. Which is why the fact that he was saying something meant something. I waited before responding. Let the message breathe. When I finally replied, I kept it clean. "Define weird." He didn't hedge. Maybe he'd been waiting for the opening. Side glances. Inside jokes no one else gets. Energy shift. You can feel it, even when they're across the room. Then, the screenshot came. A story post I hadn't seen. Private, shared only to select people. Not hers, but someone else's, from another night. The image was blurry mid-toast, but in the lower left corner, partially obscured, were the two of them, her and the man. He was looking at her, not posed, not obvious, just present. She was looking down, smiling. The caption read, "Stolen glances, clinking glasses." The words weren't attributed. The post wasn't about them, not officially. But someone had seen it, and chosen that phrase, chosen to share it with Rowan, chosen to frame it that way. Which meant it wasn't just a theory anymore. I sat with the image for a long time. Not because it was conclusive, but because it didn't need to be. This wasn't about catching her. It was about confirming that the pattern I'd been watching wasn't mine alone. Someone else had seen it too. I didn't forward the screenshot. Didn't mention it to her. I saved it quietly, not to use, but to anchor reality. When you're being quietly undermined, the first thing to slip is certainty. You begin second-guessing the shift. You wonder if you're imagining the undertones, the glances, the way silence fills a room differently than it used to. But now, I had an external confirmation. Not a smoking gun. Just a mirror. That night, she climbed into bed next to me without ceremony. No affection, no distance. Just routine. Like nothing was fraying beneath the surface. She turned off the light. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Because somewhere out there, someone else had already captioned what she was pretending not to write. She didn't notice the shift in me, not at first. I still responded when spoken to. Still showed up, still smiled in public. I didn't pull away, didn't accuse, didn't posture. That would have given her something to lean on, something to defend against. Instead, I went still. Still is harder to read, harder to challenge. Still gives nothing away, and demands nothing in return. She misread it, of course. Assumed we were leveling out. That the joke at dinner, the tension in the kitchen, the lingering silence between us were all just dust, settling. She'd glance at me sometimes, like checking the weather. But when she didn't find a storm, she moved on. She thought I was okay. The truth was quieter. I'd stopped strategizing how to fix us, stopped wondering how we got here. I began preparing for a future where she wasn't standing next to me, not because I wanted to escape, but because I finally recognized the exit for what it was, a release from pretending. She was too clever for guilt, too practiced to confess, but she underestimated how quickly a smart man can go quiet. When you take emotion off the table, what's left is structure. And I had already started removing her from the blueprint, piece by piece. I began separating shared accounts, slowly, cleanly. She didn't ask why, or if she did, I gave technical reasons. Just easier for taxes, I said about one. Streamlining notifications, I said about another. She nodded, distracted. Too busy to care. Or too confident I wasn't going anywhere. She thought she held the control because she held the secrets. But secrets only matter if someone wants to expose them. I didn't. Not yet. I wanted her to underestimate me for a little longer. We went to dinner with friends that weekend, the usual group, minus a few who were slowly drifting from her orbit. I watched her try to command the table, watched her jokes land a little flatter than before. She laughed too hard at her own stories, checked her phone more than she used to. And when he walked in late, again, her smile flickered into place before she even turned to see him. I saw it. Everyone else missed it. That was fine. I wasn't trying to convince anyone. I was just watching her finish the story she thought she was writing behind my back. And I was already drafting the ending. It was late. Not by the clock, but by the feel of the room. One of those nights where silence doesn't mean peace, just pause. She came out of the bathroom in one of the older shirts I used to love, not because it was flattering, but because it was real. Something from the part of our life that hadn't required performance. She slid under the covers wordlessly, then turned toward me. Her hand found my arm beneath the blanket. Light. Testing. I was thinking, she began, her voice softer than usual. We've been a little off. Maybe we should try a weekend away. Just us. I turned my head slowly. Not to start a fight. I had no interest in that. Just to meet her where she clearly wasn't expecting resistance. She smiled, waiting for me to match it. No pressure. I just miss us sometimes. I watched her for a moment. The way she tucked hair behind her ear when she felt unsure. The way she tried to lead emotionally without offering anything real. She reached again, this time not just her hand, but her body. Pressed lightly against me. It wasn't physical desire. It was repair work. The attempt to glue something without checking if the surface was clean. That's when I pulled back. Not dramatically. Just enough. She blinked. What's going on? I let the silence stretch, not to hurt her, but to make space for the answer. Then I said it. Calm. Quiet. I stopped laughing when I realized the joke's on me. No anger. No accusation. Just fact. Her breath caught just a little. Enough that I knew she understood. She wasn't sure how much I knew, or what I'd seen, but the words landed anyway, because part of her had always known it would come. Her mouth opened, closed. No comeback. No spin. Just a beat of stillness. She turned away slowly, retreating to her side of the bed without a word. The space between us grew heavier, not louder, and I lay there, not triumphant, not bitter, just clear. Because the thing about mirrors is they don't argue. They just reflect what's already there. It was a gallery opening, something curated and safe, filled with people who liked the sound of their own commentary. We went because we were still showing up places together. That part hadn't cracked yet. She wore something calculated, understated, with just enough elegance to make her seem effortless. I noticed her scanning the room for familiar faces. Her smile adjusted itself as needed. He wasn't there. That seemed to bother her more than she let on. We joined a cluster of acquaintances near the back, people we knew well enough to linger with, but not well enough to trust. She leaned in, ready to entertain. I stood beside her, silent but attentive. That used to be the dynamic. She'd perform, I'd anchor. It had worked, until she started performing at my expense, so when she cleared her throat, glass in hand, I knew something was coming. A setup. She gestured toward a piece on the wall, abstract, sharp. Kind of like his sense of humor, she said, her voice just loud enough to carry. Complicated. Doesn't always land. It wasn't even clever. Just pointed. Casual cruelty, disguised as banter. She waited for the laugh, the easy validation. But before anyone else could react, Rowan spoke. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't smile. Careful, he said, tilting his glass slightly. He's not the joke anymore. A beat of silence stretched across the group. Then, someone laughed. Not at me. At her. One of the women we barely knew, the kind who always read the undercurrent before deciding who to stand near. Her face changed, only slightly. But I saw it, the crack beneath the poise. She tried to chuckle, to pass it off as light. It's just banter, she murmured, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. But the mood had shifted. People turned toward me differently now. Eyes a little sharper. Expressions less certain. Her comment hadn't landed. And worse, someone had called it out before she could pretend it was harmless. That was the moment. Not explosive. Not loud. But real. Social gravity had tilted. And for the first time, she felt what I'd been living with quietly for months. That subtle erosion of credibility. The way people pull back when they sense your performance has a target. When we left, she didn't speak. Not on the ride home. Not once we got inside. She wasn't used to being the one people laughed at. And she didn't know yet that the echo of that moment would be louder than any confrontation I could have staged. She thought the tension had passed, that the moment at the gallery would fade like all the others, a wrinkle smoothed by time and careful silence. But I didn't let it. The next morning, I asked her to meet me at a cafe we used to like. Neutral ground, mid-morning. No ambient pressure. Just two people who knew each other too well. She arrived dressed for calm, soft colors, casual jacket, minimal makeup. The kind of look meant to suggest openness, even vulnerability. But I wasn't here to negotiate emotions. I'd ordered her drink ahead. She noticed. You still remember, she said, half smiling. I met her eyes. Something stay with you. She looked down, her hand wrapping around the cup like she needed something to hold. So, she began, drawing out the syllable. This feels official. I nodded once. It is. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fumble. I laid it out in full. The glances. The private posts. The story captioned, stolen glances. The one she hadn't posted but had starred in. The silence in the kitchen. The invented trip. The subtle rotation of self-care nights. The shift in how she watched the room when he walked in. She didn't deny it. Not exactly. Instead, she reached for the oldest shield. It was emotional, she said quickly. We never crossed any lines. I held up a hand, calm, not dismissive. Just final. You keep thinking this is about the shape of what happened. My voice didn't rise. It's not, she blinked. Then what is it about? I leaned back slightly, letting the answer land without rush. It was subtraction. Her lips parted, but no sound came. It wasn't a physical betrayal, I continued. You just started erasing me, slowly, in pieces, until what was left wasn't worth being loyal to. Then I slid the envelope across the table. It wasn't legal paperwork. Not yet. Just the first step. A clean outline of shared assets, steps for uncoupling accounts, and a neutral mediator's contact. No threat. No drama. Just clarity. She stared at it like it might open itself and explain the consequences she hadn't expected. I'm not angry, I added, but I'm done participating in something that treats me like background noise. She looked up. For once, nothing performative in her face. Just the realization that the story had shifted, and she wasn't the one turning the page. I stood calmly. Take your time with it, I said. And then I walked out, not with closure, but with control. The line had been drawn. The man she chose wasn't random, but he should have been. He worked at a partner firm. Not directly with me, but near enough that names crossed desks and meetings overlapped. That had once made it convenient. Now, it made things delicate. I didn't step in to punish anyone. That wasn't the point. But I did have a conversation. Not with legal. Not with HR. Just a quiet, off-calendar meeting with someone I trusted. Someone who understood how things worked behind the polished handshakes and forwarded contracts. I laid it out without tone. Just facts, observations, descriptions of blurred lines and compromised discretion. I never used the word unprofessional. I didn't need to. What I did say was this. There's a difference between someone being private and someone being predictable. He started to fall into the second category. That was enough. In our world, reliability is currency. And distractions, even subtle ones, cost trust. Nothing immediate happened. That's not how these things work. But within 2 weeks, I noticed the change. He was quietly removed from an upcoming collaboration. No announcement, no explanation. Another project he'd been positioned for shifted sideways. A meeting where his name used to be on the invite was now forwarded to someone else. He hadn't been fired. There was no scandal. Just a quiet redirection. A cooling of proximity. People noticed. They always do, even if they don't say it out loud. And in this particular ecosystem, whispers are louder than facts. As for her, she felt it too. Not because I told her. I didn't. But she started getting fewer invites to the things that mattered. Group chats she used to dominate went quiet. One of her closest friends began replying with, maybe, more often than, can't wait. At brunch, someone asked a simple question. You two still seeing each other? She laughed too quickly, waved it off. Oh no, that ended ages ago. But the conversation didn't move forward. It hovered awkward. Glasses clinked, someone changed the subject, but she'd felt it, that subtle step back, that social cooling. I hadn't staged revenge. I just opened the door and let the fallout speak for itself. In the professional world, reputation doesn't shatter. It fractures. And when it does, it doesn't make a sound, but everyone hears it. Weeks passed. The air shifted, but she pretended not to feel it. Then she hosted again, smaller this time. Just a few friends handpicked. People who didn't ask hard questions. The kind who still replied to her group texts out of habit, not warmth. I wasn't invited. She didn't say that explicitly, of course. She just stopped mentioning the dates out loud, stopped suggesting I come. I saw the prep in the fridge, the folded napkins on the counter, the extra wine chilling. I didn't ask. She didn't offer. That night I stayed out. Gave the space exactly what she wanted, or thought she wanted. When I returned later, the lights were low, the laughter long faded. She was still cleaning, methodical, slow. I didn't interrupt, just walked past the doorway and let the silence do its work. What she didn't know was that someone else had sent me a photo, a wide shot of her living room mid-evening. A polite group gathered around cheese plates, drinks in hand, leaning in not quite enough. She looked radiant, in the way people do when they're trying too hard. Everything curated, everything staged. But what stood out wasn't what was present, it was what was missing. The room had no center, no spark, just decor and noise. Days later, someone from that night ran into me at a coffee shop, an old friend of ours. She hesitated before asking, "You didn't go to her thing?" I smiled. "Wasn't my night." She hesitated, then said it. "It felt off without you." "Not bad. Just quieter. Like something used to hold the energy together, and now it's gone." I nodded. Said nothing more. She left a few minutes later, coffee in hand, thoughts trailing behind her. I knew what she meant. Because when I passed the house later that week, just passing, not checking, I saw her through the window, alone at the kitchen table. Not sad, just hollowed out. Like someone had turned the volume down and forgotten to bring it back up. She laughed once, I could tell she was on a call. But the sound didn't carry. It stopped just past the glass. That's the thing about echoes. They need something to bounce off. And when the room is finally empty, all that's left is the sound of your own voice, going nowhere. She still tells jokes, probably. But without me in the room, there's no one left to misunderstand them on purpose. No one left to pretend they're harmless. Just silence. And her.